The Houston Gamblers have officially missed the 2023 USFL postseason. Wow. This team was a weird one this year, from looking really bad in the first couple weeks, but not really, but then looking really okay to really good to then ending up losing. This team has a decent amount to dissect. So the first thing is that week 10 loss to the Breakers. Very simply, they needed to win this game. They would have been able to force tiebreakers or something, but they probably would have still been eliminated. In fact, they would have. But at the end of the day, they needed to win this game to stay alive at the very least, and they did not do that. Despite the fact they held the ball for an obscene 10 minutes more than their opponent and had 100 more yards, they lost. And it's really hard to see why. Mark Thompson played solid. Kenji Bahar played solid. They forced a couple fumbles that they just weren't able to recover, but they only had one turnover. But in the end, they lost. They outrushed the Breakers. The Breakers still can't run the ball well, and they still lost 17 to 10. This was a bad loss for them. They needed to win this game and ended up just losing in the mattered. And when you look at it, it's very weird because overall their two biggest players really were solid across the year. Bahar and Thompson were really good. Thompson was the best running back in the league this year. I really don't think there's an argument. I know some of you might say Victor. Obviously, no one will say Wes Hills. Thompson was the best running back. In only 8 games played, he had an insane 650 yards, which is second in the league. But his 81 yards per game were the most. He had 14 rushing touchdowns. Remember, Victor led the league last year with like 9, and he played all 10 games. And Thompson never lost a fumble either. He was insane. First in TDs, first in yards per game, third in rushing yards per attempt among running backs. He had by far the most carries of those guys. Kenji Bahar, he was solid overall. Fourth in yards per attempt, fourth in yards per game, fifth in touchdowns. Until he get tied to second in interceptions and eighth in passer rating. Look, Bahar had a very bad couple opening weeks, and then aside from week 10, he had a couple really bad weeks near the end of the season after he came back from his injury because he missed one game due to injury. Overall, he played really good for the middle chunk of the season, but the beginning and end, he just wasn't there. The fact that he had a 8 to 9 TD to interception ratio is a bad thing. Didn't have 200 yards per game. Overall, just a 77 passer rating is not good enough to get the job done. So, despite how great Thompson played, and he's probably going to win Offensive Player of the Year, maybe Coleman gets it, but it should go to Thompson. But they lost. But at least you can say that your team was better than last year. You went from 3-7 last year to 5-5 this year. You finished third in the division versus fourth. And the funny thing is, your team was the opposite of last year. Last year, you lost games because you kept blowing halftime leads. This time, you lost because your defense just wasn't that good. Last year, it was the other reason. Your defense was incredible. You had awesome players. Donald Payne, the dominating Chris Odom, Will Likely, and others. This year, your team had a great offense. Anthony Ratcliffe Williams was awesome for receiver, and in the end, it didn't matter because you were tied for worst in turnover differential, which you never were able to escape from the beginning of the year. And then points allowed, you were second to the bottom of the league with 230 points allowed. The fact that your defense couldn't make enough stops is the biggest reason why you lost. You only had 11 takeaways. The Generals had at least 12. So, in the end, you guys missed the playoffs. It's not like the Showboats where I could say, hey, at least you're better than last year in a really positive light. No, it's more like, yeah, you were better, but you still were the same team. You were one-sided, but then you just blew a bunch of games you should have won. So, it is what it is. You should have won that game against the Breakers earlier in the season. Would have been a lot helpful. And, at least you were in it in the end. That's all I can really say. But Gamblers, you missed the playoffs. Better luck next year.